Hello? Can anybody, I don't think I'm getting any audio.
Oh, hi, Senator Lee. Oh, hello?
Hi, Senator Lee. Can you hear me? It's Katie Hester.
And we are live.
Hello, everybody. My name is Senator Katie Fry Hester, and I'd like to welcome you all to the Joint Committee hearing on Cybersecurity, Information Technology, and Biotechnology. I'm joined here today by members of the committee and my co-chair, Delegate Michael Jackson. You want to say hi, Michael?
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us.
So I want to thank all of our wonderful speakers we have lined up today, and all you folks out there who are watching via live stream. We've got a very important topic to deal with today. As we've all seen most recently through our experiences, coping and improving the unemployment system, the state as a whole, runs on information technology, and some of our systems are legacy systems which require updating. So today we've lined up a series of speakers to help us understand the current status of our state IT systems, get a good look at what other states are doing to help address these issues, and hopefully give us some ideas on where we can go going forward. We have a number of speakers, as I mentioned today. We're going to hear from the National Association of State Chief Information Officers, followed by the Department of Labor and their IT experts. Well, we have a couple of private sector companies who will be giving us some advice, including NTT and Edwards Performance Solutions. And then we'll wind up with a presentation from the Department of Information Technology and MD Think, housed within the Maryland Department of Human Services. So with that, I'd just like to turn it over to my co-chair, Delegate Michael Jackson. Would you like to say anything before we dive in?
Yes, thanks, Senator. We do have a very robust agenda today. Each presenter has been, we submitted questions for them to answer today. For members and for anyone watching online, feel free to email any questions you may have, and we will do our best to get those answers to you as soon as possible. Today, with everything we're dealing with, technology is more important than ever. Cybersecurity is more important than ever, and biotechnology as well. So look forward to our presenters today, and we're ready to move on.
Wonderful. Thank you, Delegate Jackson. Okay, so first up, I'd like to introduce Doug Robinson, the Executive Director of the National Association of State Chief Information Officers. This is Mr. Robinson's second time presenting before our committee. This year, I hope the commute was a bit shorter. Just so everybody knows, NASCIO is an organization focused as a trusted resource for state CISOs while supporting government leaders across the agency in crafting, curating, and promoting information technology policy. And he's going to provide us with a bird's eye view of this complicated issue, really laying the groundwork for our understanding of the general trends in this area across the United States. So with that, I will turn it over to you. Doug Robinson, are you on?
I am, and I'm ready to get started, Senator Hester. Thank you, and I thank the co-chairs, Senator Hester and Delegate Jackson, for inviting me and inviting NASCIO to be able to present to you today. I have a few comments about state CIO priorities, about the response to COVID and the discussion around modernization that has taken place. Obviously, it's been very pointed the last few months around the response to the pandemic. And then also what we're seeing across the states in terms of things like what are some of the best practices, what are some of the challenges around modernization of the technology stack within state government, because this is a long-standing discussion. What are some of the best practices, the patterns of success that we've seen around states, and then also looking at what are some of the funding options, because that always seems to be the major constraint, is being able to develop and essentially sustain the modernization across a long period of time. So with that, very quickly, could I have some slides I'm going to show, so I could have the slides up. Let me go This is us. NASCIO is the organization, as Senator Hester said, that represents the state chief information officers of the executive branch. Every state has a lead IT executive appointed by their governor that serve in the state's territories and the District of Columbia. We represent 54 of those jurisdictions and have for over 50 years. And so our role is prime members are our state CIOs, but we also have 170 corporate members that also support the association as business partners. So if I could go to the next slide on top priorities for 2020. Can I get that next slide, please? There we go. I'm going to move pretty quickly through these. Here we go. Each year, the association does a forced choice ballot, an electronic ballot of our prime members, our 50 plus state CIOs. We ask them to identify their priorities for the upcoming year. We completed this 2020 top 10 survey. We've been doing this since 2006. We did this in November of 2019, released it in early December. As you can see, not surprisingly, cybersecurity is the top item. I mentioned this in my testimony last year to you from our 2019 list. It's remained the top priority for 7 consecutive years now. But as you can see, many of these others are in alignment with that and definitely need cybersecurity to support their business processes. And you can see a number of items on this list that have come into play during the response to COVID-19 across the states, particularly number 7, legacy modernization, and number 2, digital government. These are 2 areas that were certainly exposed in terms of some of their deficiencies and fragility during the response to the pandemic and continue today. And again, we're seeing the response to that. So if you look at these top 10 priorities, if I get the next slide, you can see what happened in early March for most states, and you all have experienced this. Not surprisingly, the states were overwhelmed. The senator said that, as mentioned, about information technology becoming critically important. It's now part and has been part of the fabric of state government. It's no longer a back office consideration. It must be front and center. And certainly since early March, we've seen that information technology has played a critical role in delivering citizen services and allowing state employees and others to be able to work remotely, be able to deliver those key services securely, and to also be able to continue on the open government and democracy of government like we're doing today, which is something that obviously had not been done widespread previous to the pandemic and our quarantine situation. So again, we're learning a lot of new things, and the CIOs have been really trying to look at innovative ways along with their business partners across the state agencies that they work with on a daily basis. So we can move to the next slide. I'll talk a little bit about what the CIOs have identified, and we are obviously communicating them on a weekly basis. And we've also delivered a resource guide and a recent brief on some of the technologies we've seen being used during the pandemic. And so I won't go through these, but you can certainly see the response and recovery phases of COVID-19, what states have been doing and what state CIOs have been doing. And these, again, are reflected, I think, as you'll hear today, across the agencies as well. And a big part of that is simply understanding that their infrastructure needed to be stable and needed to scale for the dramatic demand, particularly in areas like entitlements, unemployment insurance, COVID-19 response, responding to health officials' requests. Again, these were stressed beyond belief. And again, many of them did not survive the first few days of the surge. And so had to have a lot of introspection about what's going to be coming next. While all this was taking place, first and foremost, state CIOs were concerned about securing the environment, securing the data, reducing the risk of cybersecurity was a paramount issue for all the state CIOs and the chief information security officers for each state. Digital government channels were obviously stressed and clogged. What we did see is the corporate partners, the vendor community, the solution providers really stepped up and provided a lot of services and a lot of equipment to states during this time. But the IT supply chain was also stressed. So as we look forward, the question on the table for all states right now is, what's this recovery phase? How long is it going to be? It's clearly not going to be a big return. It could be a gradual return, or it could be no return at all for some segments of the economy. For some period of time, much further along in terms of the extension of those times than we ever anticipated a few months ago. So if we could move to the next slide, let me talk about what we've seen, the early observations, and this is where I'll make that linkage between our topic today about IT modernization. So we are in the field right now with our 2020 State CIO survey, which is fortuitous because I'm able to gather a lot of real-time information empirically from the voice of our state CIOs. These are statements that have been made in the preliminary data from the survey that is going to be completed here in the next couple of weeks. And again, not surprisingly, some of the observations around work from home and remote work, they've been more efficient and more productive than expected. They may continue. Security is clearly continues to be a major focus of the state CIO community and of the agencies. That has to obviously remain top of mind in all of these services. But you can see that modernizing the aging infrastructure and applications sooner rather than later has become a theme. I think it's been again recognized, and many of these systems that had not been modernized, have not been funded, had not been remediated in the recent years, all had major challenges. And again, when citizens' lives are kind of at their worst, state government really services should be at their best. And quite frankly, in many states, they were not. And again, there's a variety of issues we can talk about around this, but this is what we have to face in the future. So if I go to the next slide, the set of data around, we're asking state CIOs to rank order what they believe will be the change to business processes, practices, and investments that will need to be made post-COVID-19. And again, these are ordered based on the order of preference as it stands today. So all this data is preliminary at this point, but I expect clearly the first two or three will remain very important. And that is, we can expect the infrastructure and the services that needed to expand the work from home and to maintain remote work options for some time in the future, if not a complete change in the business model for a lot of states. And I'm talking about not only certainly all state employees, not just IT employees, but many state CIOs have 90% of their complement of their workforce still in a remote work situation. We clearly know that the digital government experience has not met its promise in terms of state government. It's not like the private sector experience. It's not seamless. It certainly doesn't provide a similar safe alternative that they expect to see from the private sector. And so this has to be, again, improved in terms of the user experience that folks had during the pandemic. Clearly needs to be improved for the variety of ways. And that's a whole nother discussion around modernizing the user experience. And you can see I've highlighted the three items that are really pertinent today, and that is state CIOs see an increased priority and an investment in legacy. This is going to have to rise to the top. It can no longer, can't be kicked down the road much longer. Expanded use of cloud and software as a service deployment. Again, this has been priority for a number of years, and we see states making those investments. Again, these are not things that can be done overnight. They take long transitions and investments, and in some cases, a change in culture of the organization to be able to do that. And again, what we're seeing is more attention on IT infrastructure consolidation, enterprise class services, again, optimizing for the enterprise environment of the executive branch and not simply making investments in individual agencies. So I think the states that had enterprise class systems prior to the pandemic went through that, I think, a lot smoother based on the experience that we've seen as they were able to tap into those systems. So they had reduced the diversity and complexity of their environment by having enterprise class systems like enterprise content management or customer relationship management, again, at a shared services environment where agencies, they basically consume services. They're not buying these individual stacks of technologies and using those within individual agencies. So, and that was clearly the case with platforms like email and collaboration, things like Microsoft Teams and Office 365. All those were able to scale. And I think this, for the majority of the states, in fact, almost all the states that had made that decision several years ago, that proved to be fortuitous in terms of their ability. So let me end with talking about the linkage to some of these topics and the evolving business models with the next slide, and talk about a little bit of what's going on in terms of the challenges. So I think we all understand, and we'll certainly hear that from the agency leadership today, that states have a significant amount of technical debt that they're sitting on today, systems that are 25, 30, in some cases 40 and 45 years old in terms of particularly their software applications. They may be running on more modern platforms, but again, they're stuck with, in some cases, proprietary platforms and complex business routines and complex system systems. This is not easy to make this transition. It's a multi-year effort. There's challenges today around supporting that with both talent in terms of the dwindling talent pool to support this hardware and software. Application maintenance costs to continue to increase, system maintenance costs continue to increase. And in some cases, there's just an overall cultural resistance to change within the agencies. And that's certainly been the case in number of transformations, is that it's very challenging to make these large switches. So while you're operating the agency and using a legacy environment to serve your citizens, whatever cohort that is, at the same time, while trying to move forward and to modernize the environment. It's, again, very difficult. You've heard the analogy about trying to basically, build the car as it's going 80 miles an hour. It's taking place in this same environment with IT systems. So it can be very difficult. States don't have a lot of the resources to do both simultaneously. One of the major challenges around system modernization, particularly large scale enterprise class platforms that serve a large set of citizens, is that they require multi-year commitment and they require multi-year funding. So it's a long-term. Procurements can be anywhere from a year to 2 years long to actually get to the procurement. And then you have issues you have to deal with. And then you have a long-term cycle that could be 4 to 5 years before you have a functionality that's delivered. So all of that, again, has begun to change with some new approaches that the states have taken, and many government agencies that mirror what's been taking place in the private sector for a number of years about modular development and around getting releases of functionality rather than waiting for the big bang. So if we can go to the next slide, I think you understand, you'll hear more about this. But what's been changing? Well, what's been changing over the last several years is how CIO organizations and states in general around IT are delivering IT services. You can see, again, this is a leading indicator question from our 2019 national survey. We've been asking this same question for 10 years. And what we see is a continuing shift from, again, what I call the owner-operator model, which has been predominant for 4 decades in state IT, to one today where we're seeing a pretty significant shift in, again, more outsourcing, business partnerships with the private sector, more use of as a service, X as a service, meaning things like software as a service, platform as a service. So again, the state is not necessarily investing in capital investments and a CapEx, but essentially focusing on acquiring IT as a service as needed. And you can see the interest in that, expanding that among the state CIOs is 92%. Pretty remarkable that we're seeing this kind of shift. So what's changed here? If you go back 10 years, number one on this list would have been increasing the size of your data centers and your data center footprints. I mean, expanding your state data center. And number two on the list was hire more state IT staff. I can tell you today, those are inverted. Those are bottom of the list. States are not expanding their data center. They're not acquiring more floor space. They're contracting it. They're not expanding their mainframe. In fact, we now have 12 states that have completely outsourced their mainframe. Their mainframe services are no longer in even the capital complex. Their mainframe cycles are run in another state under a contract. And I think we'll look at that to the future as you think big picture about modernization. It's not the question whether you actually modernize the current environment that you have, but do you look at, is there a different approach and different business model to actually achieve the business outcomes that you need for the mission of the agency? And so that's something you have to think about is, again, this model of owning and operating data centers and owner operating large platforms of technology, it may not be sustainable. State and federal governments and local governments, quite frankly, haven't shown the capability for long-term investments to maintain and modernize their environment. And so as many large corporations are doing, they're looking to the private sector to work with them. And so we see these shifts in the marketplace. So again, that's part of this modernization discussion is simply it's not a binary discussion. Do we modernize the current environment? You have to kind of raise it up a level and look at the macro view of the future of, I think questioning, do we need to continue to be in this business? Do we continue to run our own data center, or is this something we want to look to to partner as a public-private partnership. And that's certainly the case or do we want to collaborate with another state? Do we want to collaborate with our local governments? Do we want to collaborate with, again, other jurisdictions, which some states have done as well? Next slide, please, and then I'll end. So we look at, some of the options here. There's a variety of options on the table. These are all challenging for states. Funding, particularly long-term funding, where you're looking at tens of millions of dollars for perhaps one mission-critical legacy system that you have to deliver. These are some of the things that are on the table, and some are not appropriate for those. For example, user fees or transaction fees revenues are quite prominent in state government to fund technology. That's clearly not going to work with something like a UI system where you're going to then ask an unemployed person to pay a transaction fee to complete their filing for unemployment claim. That's clearly not going to work, but it does work in some other things where you have professional licenses or where you have other user fees or transaction fees that can actually support. But again, long-term, those probably aren't viable. States rely on significant grant funding from the federal government. Again, things like Medicaid, MMIS, it's a 90-10 contribution, 90% federal government, 10% states to modernize. And again, they've come out with some very targeted and defined modular development cycles for a Medicaid management information system. So that's a model. Obviously, putting it in the budget, having an appropriation strategy. The challenge over time with that is that they don't provide the sustaining or maintenance funding. And again, with changes in administrations, changes in governor, changes in CIOs and agency leaders, sometimes that navigating that can be very, very difficult over a 4 to 5 year period and getting that sustained funding. I've highlighted a couple that we've seen more traction in. Again, that's public-private partnerships. Again, using the capital of the private sector to get into a partnership with the public sector. And so if you have to do a major upgrade, there may be some benefits funding or shared and savings fundings that come out of that. It could be a shared responsibility. Private sector takes the risk on funding for a longer term payout on that partnership. And we're certainly seeing that with outsourced and managed services. Every state today has outsourced some component of their technology environment, particularly in things like broadband, managed security services, maintaining the data center. We have a number of states where their mainframe is actually still on site in the state capital, but is being managed by a private sector entity, simply because of the dwindling talent pool for both applications and maintenance support. The states, those folks have long since retired, and you can't let them travel together because there will only be 2 people left that know that particular program. So those are some of the things. We've seen some states that have actually issued bonds, and some issue bonds, a small number do bonds every year to support IT. So there's lots of options on the table. There's no one right approach. And in some cases, it may be this decision of tying in things like a capital funding request with a prioritization process under some type of governance model. So let me end with a couple of items here, particularly the last slide on what we've seen across the country. Now, embedded in each of these kind of 6 patterns are a lot of details, and I'm not going to get to those today, but we get questions. But clearly, if you look across the states in terms of modernization, you see some common patterns, and again, a lot of those have to do with enterprise leadership and governance. And what I mean by that is that there's an overarching investment and management committee. There's a set of state leaders, not IT leaders, but a set of state business leaders that look at the portfolio of needs. They prioritize the mission critical systems and the funding required and the timelines. And with that data, which comes out of your enterprise project and portfolio and investment management capabilities, with all of that, then they can make decisions on what goes forward. I think that's going to be even more critical in the next 2 to 3 years as states face massive fiscal constraints and budget reductions based on what we're seeing from the impact of the pandemic, which we know will happen for several years. So these are some of the things we're seeing. Again, trend toward more consolidation, clearly having a roadmap, which is your statewide enterprise architecture. So you want to keep your investments aligned. The old phrase in architecture is it's not about the kinds of numbers, but it's the number of kinds. And unfortunately, with the state, they have a number of kinds. And so you want to try to begin to reduce that across that, because that's where you have a lot of sunk cost, is the diversity. And so that's part of your architectural piece and making those decisions. And I think certainly you want to have some type of portfolio, again, enterprise level portfolio where the decision makers at the business level can see all of the current legacy environments across all of the different agencies and start making decisions as to how those investments are allocated rather than them competing against each other for very scarce dollars. You have to make those decisions to get those long-term commitments. And again, under that topic, there's probably 10 things we can talk about in terms of what are the best practices around project management. And if you look at modernization efforts across the country, and if I were to generalize some of the common themes around legacy modernization and challenges, one is clearly you need strong project management discipline. The failure of the project management team is one which results in a lot of these legacy modernization projects going south. The other is the challenges around long-term funding and funding commitment, the capital necessary to start, and then resources in general, just skilled resources within state agencies, because more and more of those folks are retiring. It becomes more of a challenge for both the CIO and for the leadership of the cabinet secretaries and their agency CIOs to get the requisite skill sets to be able to move these projects along. And you have to have that balance between your private sector partners and the skill set in state government. So this is a complex area that obviously could spend lots of hours discussing a lot of the elements of each of those, but I will leave it at that because I don't want to overextend my welcome here, and we can get back to perhaps questions when we have the opportunity. So I thank you today for the opportunity to provide some remarks.
Thank you, Director Robinson. We really appreciate you joining us at this critical time when information technology is more important than ever and state budgets are smaller than ever. So we've got an interesting roadmap to follow here. I'd like to remind members that if you have a question, if you could raise your hand and I see one already from Senator Lee. We probably have time for a couple of questions. So the first one from Senator Lee. And you may have to unmute yourself.
Okay, can you hear me now?
We can hear you now.
Okay. Thank you for this excellent presentation. I just wanted to ask you, now we're in a new norm, and we see a dramatic increase in the use of telework both by the government and private sector. There are some issues that I'm wondering if Homeland Security or NIST has provided guidance on, particularly on the use of VPNs, virtual private networks, that are used to access information, particularly now since a lot of government workers are accessing information and they're going back and forth with their agency, but they're working at home. So, there are bad players sometimes that seek to compromise these VPNs. Is there some sort of guidance that NIST or Homeland Security is giving that you know of, or are states taking action, or is there an awareness of this now?
Yes, Senator. There has been guidance issued by CISA out of DHS around the use of VPN. Obviously, it's critical in terms of remote work for the states to deploy VPN. That's what we saw as a tremendous surge. We saw states that had to do a 5 to 10x increase in their VPN licenses to allow their employees to work from home. And that's very important to be able to do that, to be able to have that capability again. And again, that's a good example of what you want to do at the enterprise level, so you can leverage, negotiate both the deployment as well as the upcoming the unit pricing of your VPN over time, because we're going to stay with this for who knows what period of time. That is one option. The other is virtual desktop, VDI technology, and we've seen again a number of states be able to use virtual desktop technology, which essentially allows folks to use their personal laptops and home computers. Again, most state CIOs and states don't advise that, but they were certainly under the crunch. So there's guidance from CISA, there's guidance from NIST, but again, most of the states are making sure that the most important thing for them to do is secure all the way to that endpoint. And for examples of something that would be of a convenience, allowing state employees to use their own home printers, again, that's prohibited by most states be able to do that. So that is the type of things they've had to have basically institute some constraints which may reduce the convenience factor, but I think they have to do that. I think we're going to see in the future is number one, all states are going to move to basically a laptop only environment. States will not be leasing or buying desktop computers in the future. I think they're going to anticipate a post-pandemic world where all state employees, regardless of the line of business, will probably start to be issued laptops to make it a lot more easy for the work from home transition. And we're going to see those be fully locked down from a security standpoint, but enabled for secure remote connections to a variety of services. But it has become very, very complicated.
Thank you once again, Director Robinson. We have time for one quick question from Delegate Feldmark, and I'm going to ask you to keep your response as short as possible, Director Robinson, and then we'll move on to the Secretary and follow up with more details offline. I know I, for one, want to learn more about the funding sources, so I will be following up with you certainly offline about that.
Okay.
Delegate Feldmark, why don't you go ahead and ask your question?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for this presentation. My question is about the user interface as we look more at digital government and applications that the general public needs to be using. We had an issue with the Beacon system for unemployment insurance, that it was designed originally not compatible with Macs, and there was no workaround for Mac users initially. We had several constituents who had that problem in our office. They ended up going to friends or neighbors to access a PC, which of course is not ideal in a pandemic, creating an additional exposure, but they were able to get what they needed to get done. And they decided that was a risk they needed to take. Since their issues were resolved, I don't know how long it actually took. I'm hopeful that there was eventually a workaround developed, but I'm curious if there are standards or best practices around applications that are intended for the general public and accessibility from or compatibility with different operating systems and browsers through which the public may be accessing them. I understand that may add to the complexity of the development, may add some cost, but it seems like an important piece for an application that's intended for the general public. So I just wondered if there were some guidelines or standards around that. Yes,
absolutely. And I think that has been the case with, again, modern, aspiration for every state government is to have a modern environment, whether it's a modern business or a modern website. But again, part of that is the understanding that you have to take time to look at that user experience. And part of that is making sure that anything today that would be built new would have all of that capability embedded in that. When we're trying to, again, remediate, or as the Senator and I talked last week, put the lipstick on a pig, that's what happens, right? You have these large kind of back-end monolithic systems, and it can be often difficult. But as you look at modernizing that is a key thing, is getting the user input, perhaps having focus groups, building personas for different individuals. I think most critically, you've mentioned a couple. One is that it needs to be agnostic to the user, meaning in terms of the browser, in terms of the desktop or laptop. And I think most importantly, it needs to be mobile ready. Any system today delivered needs to be mobile ready, meaning that it has to be able to work in a mobile device on your smartphone, because we're seeing an increasingly significant number of users. That's how they do their work as a customer, as a client, of any private sector, and that's what they're going to expect. When I talked about their expectations, delivering expectations, that's it. So yes, there are a number of states. We've actually recognized a number of states with our national awards based on their enhancement of a citizen-centric experience. So there's lots of good examples out there that you can use.
Senator?
Yes, Delegate.
Before we move on, Doug, we'll do a follow-up with you, and we'll make sure that all the members of the committee gets the information. If you could, one, we need to make sure we get the PowerPoint, but two, partnerships with universities regarding, from a research perspective, on ensuring these systems are applicable to tomorrow. And in the public safety industry, which I've been in for quite a while, and in the military, systems that members have are already equipped with adaptable, internal operating systems to where we can do what we need to do as we go along. Now, obviously, there's a cost to that, but I'd love to talk to you offline regarding that and options regarding those going forward. So we appreciate you sticking with us, and we'll certainly be in touch with you as we move forward. So thank you.
Look forward to hearing the rest of the comments today. I'll stay on.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Senator, if I might, Secretary Robinson, you're no stranger to us. We seem to be seeing you now just as much as we have during the session. So you're on.
Thank you, Chair Jackson. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Perfect. We're getting used to this virtual world. I want to just say thank you to Chair Hester and to you, Chair Jackson, for inviting us to present today. I know this is about information technology, but as many have already mentioned, the Department of Labor has been right in the middle of that as we have been pressed to handle a very difficult situation concerning unemployment insurance during this pandemic. So with that, I'd like to introduce my team. I do have on this meeting with us my Deputy Secretary, David McGlone. He has a ton of institutional knowledge as he was with the department during the Great Recession and through the entirety of the modernization project with unemployment insurance. So I think he may be helpful. I also have our department's Chief Information Officer, Dave Stein, who has also been with us for some time and has great information and knowledge about our Maryland Automated Benefits System. So with that, we submitted some slides. Are we able to get the slides on the screen? Perfect. So I'm going to, let's see, we'll start on slide 2, and I'm going to breeze through some of these first initial slides because they provide just some background unemployment insurance information that you all are probably well aware of what we've been dealing with. So I'll hit a couple highlights and get to our technology. You had asked about an overview of our modernization project, our Maryland Automated Benefits System, the Beacon system, and our telephone technology. So we can move right to slide 3. And I'm not going to go through all of our numbers because you've probably seen them in press releases, but I do want to highlight, as Mr. Robinson did, the massive volume increase that we have faced at the Department of Labor in Maryland and at Department of Labors across the country. It's nothing like anything we've ever seen. We have actually processed more new claims in the past 3 months than in the last 3 years combined. So that obviously has something to do with the benefits of our technology, as well as the dedication of my amazing unemployment insurance team, staff, who is complemented by our IT team. I would be remiss if I did not give them a shout out because they have all worked around the clock during this pandemic, late hours and through the weekends to get where we are today. To give you some perspective, back during the Great Recession in 2008 through 2010, we were seeing an average peak of 6,000 claims per week. That was at our peak filing times. During what that recession, was called a recession. And right now we have seen weeks with over 100,000 claims per week. We are still seeing the high volume of 40, 50,000, 60,000 claims per week, even, on the downward trend. So I share that only to give you some perspective as to, the volume that we're dealing with while we are also working to upgrade and enhance and utilize our technology to get through this. We can go to slide 4. And I'm not going to read this slide to you, but I do want everyone to be aware of that in addition to providing our regular unemployment insurance benefits to claimants, we were also tasked with administering and standing up all of the new federal programs under the CARES Act. So I'm sure everyone by now has heard these terms, but the PUA program is brand new for self-employed independent contractors and gig workers. The federal pandemic unemployment compensation program was created to add $600 per week additional benefits to all of our claimants. And the pandemic unemployment compensation, emergency unemployment compensation program is the extended benefits program. So it gave all of our claimants an additional 13 weeks of unemployment insurance benefits. Maryland currently has a 26-week program. So with an additional 13 weeks, every claimant receives 39 weeks of benefits. So we'll move to slide 5. And I'll go through this one quickly for you as well, but it's a timeline and it presents a picture for you. The top of the line are all of the things that we in the state have done to handle this crisis with unemployment from the date that the governor declared the state of emergency until now, including the passage of the CARES Act and the implementation of our technology program Beacon. The bottom of the timeline shows you all of the unemployment insurance program letters that we have received from the U.S. Department of Labor. You may have heard me talk previously about the directives and the changes and guidance that has come from our federal partners during this pandemic. They are truly, I believe they are trying to be helpful and provide us with instructions and guidance, but because of the timeline for which the CARES Act was rolled out and states were expected and pressured to get programs up and running, the instructions and the guidance was piecemeal. And so to give you an example of what we were dealing with, the CARES Act launched the end of March. We were one of the first states in the country to launch our Beacon system to take applications for the CARES Act programs, all 3 programs. So that happened on April 24th. And the following Monday, we received one of these 16 UPLs from the federal government, giving us new and additional instructions and adding eligibility requirements for PUA claimants, requiring that we allow our claimants to self-certify their income. The reason I explain that is because what that means in terms of technology is that we had to, after we worked in a very expedited fashion to get the system up and running, the following Monday, as everyone I'm sure is aware, we were dealing with an overload in volume and working around the clock with our vendor to get things up to speed. And at the same time, we had to go back into our system and reprogram some of the eligibility requirements, as did every state in the nation, because we had just received the notice from the federal government telling us exactly what they needed. So the way we had programmed it before was a little bit more in line with our regular UI program. It was a requirement, not an option. So we had to take that time to do some reprogramming. That's just one example of the things we had to change throughout this process. So we can move on to slide 6. I'm also not going to read this to you, but I'm going to get more into the Beacon one-stop application in a later slide. But things that we have done during this pandemic that do overlap with technology resources are launching the Beacon one-stop application, expanding our call center hours, expanding and launching a new IVR system, interactive voice response system for our claimants, adding a virtual assistant to our website and to that IVR system. And of course, we have doubled our call center staffing as needed. In addition to what's on this screen, as was mentioned, I think in the previous presentation, we, like other states, also had to make improvements in our printing capacity. We had to virtualize much of our workforce in stages, and that meant purchasing laptops and VPNs and headsets and docking stations. We had to increase mailroom staff and train our staff in all the new policies and procedures and requirements of the new federal programs. You might imagine our 400 unemployment insurance professionals at the Department of Labor have been used to a federal program requirements of reviewing documentation such as W-2s and working with back and forth with employers in the processing of these claims. The CARES Act, for the first time in history, made self-employed individuals and independent contractors available and eligible for unemployment. That meant our team also had a learning curve of needing to be trained to review 1099s, quarterly wage statements. These employees that were filing were self-certifying their income and following up during a required federal timeline with documentation that my team had never had been trained to.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but we have some very specific technical questions. And I'm wondering if you could skip ahead to like slide 10, 11, and 12 so that we have an ample time for our members to ask their questions. I really appreciate this.
Sure.
Thank you.
Sure, I can. All of these items do relate to technology. So I will quickly go through slide 7. We utilized our technology to waive federal and state requirements that we had authorization to do under the CARES Act. Slide 8 specifically talks about all the ways our technology allowed us to automatically cancel certain issues and automate our programs. And I will highlight the last couple bullets on there because we have heard now from thousands of employers in the past month who are having some problems with employees refusing to return to work. And so in order to complement the way that they communicate with our department, we've utilized our technology and added a new link and opportunity page for them on our website so that they can communicate with us directly and in real time notify the department when they make offers to employees to return to work and when any employee refuses to return to work. We're thankful for technology for allowing us to do most of those things. So slide 9, I think you asked me to go to 10, but slide 9 is one of the questions you asked us about, which is our legacy Maryland Automated Benefits System. That system was launched in 1998. It is the system that manages the benefit payment portion of the program, the accounting, employer tax, adjudication, overpayment tasks associated with the program. So we were talking about the Beacon One Stop earlier, and I want to make it clear that that program was stood up just like every state in the country had to stand up a program to handle the new federal CARES Act programs. Our legacy system was not one that in any reasonable timeline could have been programmed to handle the brand new federal programs. So like every other state, we stood up a new program and worked with a vendor that had been working on our modernization project for many years. Let's flip to slide 10 and talk a little bit more about Beacon, because the Beacon system that was set up to handle the application process. I mentioned that we launched this system in the first days of any states launching the ability to take applications on all 3 federal programs. We are the only state in the nation that does have a true one-stop application portal for unemployment insurance. So our claimants are able to file online for regular UI and the CARES Act programs all in one place. In other states, often there was what looked like one system, but the CARES Act requires that claimants be denied in the regular UI program before becoming eligible for PUA. So our system allows them to file one application in the Beacon One Stop, and we determine in the processing of that application, if they are denied, they get automatically moved into PUA. They don't have to get a denial letter and then file separately for PUA. We believe that was a huge benefit to our claimants. The Beacon system is cloud-based using Microsoft Azure. And while the launch on April 24th it did not go as planned, while the system had been tested in that streamlined period between the CARES Act passage and the launch of the program, it's hard, I think, for any system. And I think Mr. Robinson alluded to the fact that many states across the country had issues dealing with the volume. It was hard to anticipate or replicate during the testing phase, having hundreds of thousands of claimants all in the system at one time in the first hours of the launch. What I will say is the vendor, Sagtech, worked with us around the clock through the night for several days. And in those first hours and days, we did solve those volume problems and the capacity problems for people being able to get into the system, not have to wait in line and do everything they were supposed to be able to do. So I will mention that this was not necessarily the problems that we saw were not infrastructure problems. They were really based on the influx of users in the system that we have never seen historically and certainly hope to never see again. So if you want to move to slide 11, we'll talk about our modernization project and preparing us for the future. So as I mentioned, we made the decision to work with the vendor Sagtech on the Beacon One Stop portal because they had already been working in our system since 2015 on the larger modernization of the entire Maryland unemployment insurance system. This is a 100% federally funded project. It's ongoing. If the pandemic had hit us, potentially 6 months later than it did, we might have launched this project and been in a different place when in terms of handling it. But we can't help that. And the COVID-19 hit us when it did. And so we put in a stopgap measure with the Beacon One Stop to enable us to use some of that technology we had already created with Sagitech and launched the One Stop portal to take all application. But the modernization project, which is anticipated to be launched later this fall, will do all the things that are on your screen. I'm not going to read them all to you. It will handle every aspect of the Maryland Unemployment Insurance Program. So in addition to the application process, it will handle all of the benefits, the tax side, all of the processing of claims from start to finish. It will effectively eliminate the need for our Maryland automated benefits systems, and the entire system will move forward in the cloud. I think you only asked for about the unemployment insurance modernization, but I will quickly mention to you, because I'm a big fan of MD Think, and I know you're going to hear more about that from DHS later. The modernization project for unemployment insurance obviously started back in 2015, prior to MD Think. But the department is also in the process of modernizing our licensing system. That project is called ELMO, the Electronic License Modernization, and it is to be synchronized with MD Think. And we're working in partnership with Do It on that. So just to let you know, we are working very hard to bring all of our systems into the 21st century. So with that, I'll touch on our telephone technology and then leave time for questions. Our claimants now can contact our department 7 days a week. That was effective April 18th. And Saturday, let's see. Yeah, after Saturday hours were effective April 18th and Sunday hours, June 7th. Our monthly call volume in May was over 800,000 calls, and we have had times when we have received 1,000 calls per minute. So as you can imagine, we needed to utilize technology to enhance our IVR system, the interactive voice response system. We have done that and increased our capacity of lines for concurrent calls from 168 to 560. We did that in conjunction with our partner in Do It. And we have offered our claimants the ability to access the virtual assistant while they're on hold and waiting to speak to a live agent as well. So with that, Chair Hester, I mentioned I do have a couple members of my team available, and we'd be happy to take any questions you may have.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Secretary. I really appreciate the overview. And I've got two questions already. We'll go first to Delegate Bartlett and then second to Senator Rosapet.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator, and thank you, Secretary Robinson, for your presentation. First of all, thank you for the automation. Oh, and I apologize for not showing my face. I'm not feeling very well, so I figure I can just get away with the audio today, hopefully. So thank you for the automation. I think that's great. I have a couple of quick questions. So how much of the phone system uses automation? So like if someone calls, is there a robust automation process with the phone system?
So yes, and I may ask my team to jump in if I miss anything here, but our interactive voice response system is fully automated from the point when someone calls and claimants are able to file their weekly certifications, reset their PIN numbers, check their payment status. All of that is automated, and when they call, they get numbered options for what they need to do in the system. The separate number to reach a live agent, we separated that out during the pandemic so that people knew that they needed a number to work through our automated system and another number and not have to hold through all of that if they only needed to speak to a live agent.
Okay, I'm not sure a lot of people understood that because I got a ton of folks saying that they never received a pickup, when they called in to speak to an agent. Let me ask you one other quick question, because I know we don't have a ton of time, and that is, actually I had two quick questions. As part of the modernization project, is there in the foreseeable future any type of DOL app? Like an app to be used on your phone?
Oh, Yes, actually, I'm glad you asked that question. The mobile app for the Beacon One Stop and absolutely, which will be utilized for modernization as well, has been in testing for some time. And that has always been in the works. As someone mentioned earlier, we did have a problem during the beginning of the launch of the Beacon One Stop with utilization on Macs. That was fixed fairly quickly. And then it was fixed so that claimants could see the screen fully on their phones. And the next step, of course, is that mobile app. We know that's very important for all of our customers today, and we hope to be able to, have that available to them very soon.
Okay, is that soon within this 2020, 2021?
Yes.
2020? Okay, great. And last question was, you mentioned the testing phase prior to launch, and I just wanted to know if applicants or claimants were part of that testing phase, and how long was the testing phase prior to launch of Beacon One Stop?
Sure. So I might ask my deputy secretary to jump in if I missed the timeline, but I will remind you that the CARES Act passed Congress on March 29th. And we launched our Beacon One Stop system to take applications for those federal programs on April 24th. So that is a condensed timeline whereby we had to, after the passage of the CARES Act, we had to procure a vendor. We had to review demonstrations from different vendors. We talked with our state partners. We were working with our national organization and our federal partners in USDOL, getting recommendations as to, Congress passed the legislation and told states to administer these programs, but states were really on their own to kind of figure out how to do that. And again, these are new programs for claimants that have never been eligible in the history of unemployment insurance. So, and we did not have all the instructions on eligibility for how the federal government wanted us to calculate those benefits at that time. So it was a condensed and streamlined timeline for sure for testing. But the minute that we procured through an emergency procurement, the vendor Sagitech to work on this, which was a decision made, as I mentioned before, due to their long-standing history with the department in working towards our modernization, it seemed very logical that they had already done so much programming and had so much familiarity with our system that they would be able to stand up a one-stop portal for applications for the CARES Act programs more quickly than anyone else. And that proved to be true. We launched earlier than most states. So that being said, the timeline was within 2 to 3 weeks of testing and to launch, because we knew that our claimants needed access to those benefits and the federal government had made them available. So we were doing everything in our power to make that available to them.
Thank you very much. Thank you, chairs.
Sorry.
Senator Rosenblatt.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Madam Secretary, for joining us. Obviously, you of all people and everybody in your department and everybody you work with have been frustrated by all the challenges you've had over the past couple of months. It's been incredibly stressful for everybody, and we understand that. I want to put a little more positive spin on it and then ask you a question you may not want to address today, but I really want you to think about. I've been involved with these issues for a long time. I used to be co-chair of this committee. So I've dealt with lots of agencies over lots of technological challenges. And one of my frustrations is how slow government is in upgrading technology. I mean, really, really, really slow. And I've been impressed that now we have a crisis. Oh, we can actually move fast. And I think we need to think about that and see if what we've learned during this crisis, that if we could bring some of the same approaches, vision, techniques, leadership, technology, whatever it is, to our day-to-day technological service, it seems to be a huge opportunity. So I just want to ask you, and you have the advantage also having come in from the outside. So you came into the department with a new set of eyes. I mean, that's a huge advantage. And I just wondered either now or later if you have thoughts about how we can take the lessons of fast implementation and flexibility and agility, even with mistakes, and make that more common in government here in the state.
Sure. Thank you, Senator, for the question and for those comments. And I'll take some of it as a compliment because yes, it has been stressful, and we have worked very hard with our internal state partners and our federal partners and with the private sector to get to where we are today. I will tell you that during the pandemic, the state of the emergency and the lifting of so many regulatory restrictions allowed us to move faster and to do what we needed to do. We have absolutely learned lessons that we will use going forward. And I think that every state has. And we are in a fortunate position, I think, in Maryland, because we were already so close to modernizing our system. And now we had to push through, a stopgap system for applications for the CARES Act. And we have learned so much that we have, ramped up our staffing and our technology and our capabilities. I think that going forward from this, we're going to be in a better place, and we're going to know exactly, what is necessary, where we need to focus our time and our resources. So I don't know if that answered your question, but I do feel like we're in a better place, and we have certainly learned a lot of lessons.
I think when you take a breath, when you have a chance to take a breath, sharing with the committee suggestions for across government based on your experience would be very helpful. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Sure. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that question, Senator Rosapep. And Madam Secretary, that's exactly why I wanted to have you on today, because in my opinion, it didn't have to be the Department of Labor. The crisis could have impacted any of our agencies. And I just wanted to make sure I understood something that you said, because I think it goes to the heart of the technical deficit that we have across the state of Maryland. And I want to check my understanding about the interaction and the relationship between Beacon and MABS, because it seems to me that if I'm understanding it correctly, that the Beacon, was a new solution that helped with the application process. But MABS, I think, is still operating on the 1998 mainframe computers in the basement of the department. And therefore, if you're talking about processing claims, you can have them come in as fast as possible. But if you're still limited by the server capacity of the MABS, then it's going to take just as long to get the payments out. And the reason I want to clarify this is because I think that many of our state agencies are running on these outdated, mainframe computer systems, and we really have to get the entire state up into the cloud for both efficiency and also cybersecurity. So could you just clarify that relationship between Beacon and MABS? Thank you.
Sure, absolutely, Chair Hester. You're absolutely right in terms of the state's regular unemployment insurance program. So the Beacon One-Stop Portal is processing everything for the federal CARES Act programs. But obviously, we know that going forward, our regular unemployment insurance program, that is the system that is being modernized and that we will need to continue with. So the Beacon One-Stop gave our claimants the ability to file their applications for the regular program through that application, but that information then does get pushed to the MABS system, which is still handling the processing of those payments and the tax side. So we are hopeful that the full modernization and the pulling away from that legacy system so that the entire system is in the cloud is going to be a huge benefit for us going forward.
So when the CARES Act goes away, will we still be reliant on MABS? Is that correct?
Until we have fully launched our modernized system, that's correct.
Okay, and do we have a...
But in both worlds right now with MABS and Beacon.
Okay. Do we have a timeline for that?
Hopefully later this fall. This year, 2020. That's our goal.
Good. Sounds good.
We got held up a little bit, obviously, by this pandemic.
Yeah. No, and obviously this committee wants to partner with you on modernizing not only the Department of Labor, but IT systems across the state. Okay. I don't see any other questions. Do you, Delegate Jackson?
I do not. Thank you again, Secretary Robinson. Always great to speak with you, and we look forward to continuing this partnership.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us. You're, of course, welcome to stay on. We're going to move on to our private sector panel. We have folks, who are willing to give us some free advice. We've got both John Fiastro and Mr. Siddiqui from NTT Data Services. Mr. Siddiqui is the CTO of the Public Sector Division. And then we also have representatives from Edwards Performance Solutions, which is concentrating on providing cybersecurity and IT services around legacy projects. And I know that they've done some work for Congress. And so I want to ask both private sector panels to give us their best kind of advice on how we can move forward, especially in a resource constrained environment. And then we'll open it up to questions for both private sector companies at the same time. So with that, I think Mr. Siddiqui, you are up first.
Thank you, Chairman Hester. I appreciate it. And thank you, everybody, for your time. What an esteemed group, and it's an honor to be here. I'll take about 8 to 10 minutes. I don't know if you have my presentation. Perfect. Okay, great. Yeah, I'll just do a quick introduction here and then get right into it. The next slide, please. So as you said, I'm part of NTT Data. I'm the CTO for our public sector group. We're part of NTT Group, which is a $100 billion organization, 300,000 professionals. More importantly, I think what's important here is we bring a lot of experience over the years, since the 1960s in system modernization, legacy modernization, the journey to the cloud, application, infrastructure, networking, telecommunications, and sort of more importantly, bringing all those silos together. So next slide, please. So that's kind of the heritage of the organization, and we spend a lot of time with R&D as well. So, you know, the good thing about this presentation is that there's some amazing content you guys have already heard prior to this. So this is really just a reinforcement of what we've been hearing. I heard Senator Jim Rosa Pepe, sorry for pronouncing the name, but, you know, really hit on a very important point, which is, you know, the major gaps I think that we typically see or perceive with government. However, I am seeing things change, but I'll talk a little bit about this slide. And the important thing here to understand, number one, is there are a lot of similarities between what private sector and public sector are doing. And that's kind of the perspective I wanted to provide on this particular slide, is that while there are initiatives that, you know, we typically see, you know, for example, the unprecedented level of modernization across industry, you know, the whole private sector migration from hardware to the cloud. You know, so the motivation for private sector has always been, you know, this perceived benefits of cost savings, efficiencies, ROI, competition. And that's kind of been the motivation. And there's been an impetus to try to do this in a way that's more nimble, be able to invest more upfront, you know, change rapidly, transform digitally, right? We talked a little bit about automation, using data, using analytics, using AI, you know, all these kind of buzzwords, if you will, and really being able to do that in a rapid way. You know, obviously procurement cycles are different, and we've seen a lot of the results, you know, in the private sector. But one of the commonalities I'll talk about here is the fact that there are barriers, right? Both private sector and public sector both have major barriers, and these barriers are the ones in the middle column here. You know, while it's great to be able to transform digitally and the rapid changes, these things aren't easy. The barriers include things like lack of a vision or business case, lack of centralized governance. One of the things I see often within public sector and government in general is, look, a lot of agencies, you know, the departments are making their own decisions. They're siloed. And so there is no shared services, as I think was talked about before, or centralized governance in how to drive IT modernization efforts, how to drive centralized security around it. So what you create is these real big silos, and modernization efforts never get done. And part of the governance is also what to fund, how much to fund, the cost aspect of it, the training aspect of it, and planning. You know, no clear choice on technology vendors, lack of skills for migration to newer platforms like cloud. You know, and obviously that those are challenges that both private sector and public sector face. They just handle them in different ways. So, but you know, the desired state is obviously, as has been talked about here, you know, a flexible architecture, right? That's critical, right? That's moving as business needs change. So this move to cloud, for example, right? How do we get to that? How do we build cloud native applications, you know, break them down simply? How do we make sure that IT spend is cost optimized? I think that was one of the things that was talked about earlier. How do you manage operational risk and mitigate operational risk? That's a big area of concern for in migration and modernization. And then making sure that, we're building for scale and usability. So the next slide, please. So that's kind of, so there's a lot of commonality there. So what are we seeing then is a good approach, right? So one of the things I talk about often is this safe passage through modernization. And as legislators, something for you guys to consider, right? What are traditional modernization approaches? Well, they're high risk and they're high cost up front, right? And typically very limiting. They're driven by technology and not by the business or the mission. They have complex architectures and tooling, and they've been sort of built. They're layers and layers and layers of technology built on top of each other because the governments didn't want to spend the money to be able to plan for a proper, modern migration, right? And so, but as you've heard from the previous discussions, it's not easy to do. None of this is easy. You have to consider, early collaboration with the mission and the different departments and the user communities. Very important. We talked about user experience earlier. Ensuring that process alignment, making sure that the portfolio that you're looking to modernize is being looked at from a value and a risk perspective. Again, public sector doesn't have to worry about competition, which is good, but there is a little bit of ROI, right? How do you make sure that you do more with less effectively, right? How do you efficiently save and pay for modernization efforts? How do you leverage the best technologies, more optimal technologies in the best way? And there's ways. We got to use the technology that's out there in the best way. So the recommended approach is, while there may be some costs up front, you want to over time reduce that risk and cost through cost neutral strategies. A big part of that is, process enablement, future ready digital enablement of technology. What I mean by that is really just, using what was talked about earlier, right? Using automation technologies, using analytics for better decision making, more transparency, using simpler tools, right? Don't go for the shiny thing, just understand and plan better, and make it more user-centric, citizen-centric. Anything that's the citizen has to engage with has to be easy. It's the whole consumerization of IT, right? Everybody wants to be able to do exactly what they do at home, or order an Uber or shop on Amazon. They want to be able to go to their unemployment insurance system or any other system for that matter and have the same type of experience, right? So that consistency. So cost neutral over time is really important. How do you do that? So next slide, please. And so this is kind of the rules for the road, if you will, right? Just a few minutes, 10 minutes. So I thought this was probably the more important thing to kind of talk about was, all right, problems, public sector typically doesn't have a lot of money to spend and a lot of skill. Well, how do you get to this nirvana state? There's a lot here, but typically you start off with kind of the left side, right? You have the base case, you have a large modernization project. Well, there's a combination of things. These blue boxes here, and then the green ones later on, are really levers that you can use over time in a project to be able, and I'm going to give you some examples here, practical examples in a second, to be able to do some labor arbitrage, right? Look at labor mix, from the different categories of labor that you're using. Automation is a big and important area. And what I mean by automation, right? So if there's an opportunity to be able to provision some infrastructure and scale it in an automated way, in other words, move to cloud in a faster way, or be able to deploy bots to be able to provide a certain function during the modernization process, well, consider those, right? Those are things, and we can obviously help with those, or systems integrators can help with those. Shifting left, right? The more self-service, centralized portals, single pane of glass, those type of things help because the self-service will help you manage costs on resources. And of course, problem management, knowledge and resource management are all important aspects as well, making sure people are trained. And as you get into those, as that happens, you're looking at a year of stabilization of a typical modernization program, maybe a little less if you're doing well. And as you're applying automation techniques and as you're applying labor arbitrage, you're starting to see you're starting to get into more of a rationalized state. And rationalization is looking at application portfolio rationalization. Hey, what applications do we not need? And typically, again, all this is wrapped around governance, right? We have to continue to collaborate and communicate and say, all right, we have 5 of these analytics tools. We don't need 5. As an agency, as a state, we probably need 1. Let's hone in on that one, get rid of some of the other additional costs, right? And that's rationalization. And believe it or not, if you go back today and you look back into the cupboard, you probably have half a dozen analytics tools. You probably have multiple, workforce life cycle tools and service management tools and things of that, security tools, which you don't really need. So rationalization is an important aspect of it. And then once you're down to this point, you're already potentially could be saving 40% through automation and optimization just within the contract that you have. You're not spending more money on this. You're taking the money that you already have and applying it to automation type activities and rationalization activities to be able to then take a chunk and be able to apply it to modernization activities, like, for example, moving to the cloud. Again, it's all easier said than done, but we've done it. So the next slide, please, talks a little bit about a practical example where we've done it. So Texas Department of Transportation, they outsourced all their application maintenance, development, device support, infrastructure, security to us, us being NTT Data. And the idea was they had, they maintained 80,000 miles of road and 11,000 employees work there. And the idea was that they wanted to transform their applications, their legacy systems, their customer-facing, citizen-facing systems over a period of time. And we did that through the approach that we just took, which you just saw there, by automating some of their process, by bringing, I think I heard mobile first, right? Being able to do mobile first type strategies, start breaking down certain legacy silos into cloud, right? We said, all right, hey, there are workloads that we can start moving into the cloud and where it makes sense. It's not lift and shift. It was kind of re-architecting and then breaking down those things into the cloud. And being able to, again, bring some shift left and self-service capabilities where we didn't have to have resources. We were able to streamline security significantly, right? Because we saw that there's layers and layers of security. We were able to really help with that. And we were able to support, reduce almost $40 million in costs, from 40 million to 29 million a year in 1 year. So it's a significant drop just through the slide before that, and you'll have that slide. Next slide.
Mr. Siddiqui?
Yes.
As a person who sits on the appropriation committee, I love to hear a reduction in costs. That last statement refers to the last statement you made. But if you could, in the interest of time, can you as you're wrapping up, talk about each person today, and we've heard in the past, we talk about the lack of skill set. How do you build that lack of skill set? How do you build upon that or to ensure that you have a skill set, high school, universities, colleges, or others? So that's a vital point for us, because if we do everything that's out there and we can adhere to everybody's best practices, but if we don't have the skill set. So if you could talk about that briefly before we move on to the next group.
Yeah, absolutely. No, it's a great question. Absolutely, Delegate. So it starts right from the beginning, right? This is kind of like, testing by design, or, when you're planning up front in a major program, a modernization program, you have to, and I remember I talked about planning. So part of the planning is understanding what kind of skill sets you're going to need, not for now, but also for the future. And in particular for the government, right? So if it's looking at automation, if we're going to take, a service desk person who's responding to incidents, and we're saying, look, you may be needed in year 2. How do we retrain you to be able to figure out maybe, a more advanced security position? So why don't you go and start taking security advanced certification courses in security? So, but that is also part of understanding where we're going, right? What the future state looks like for the modernization efforts. And then, or RPA, for example, we said, all right, in some cases it was, look, because of the automation that we're going to bring in, we may not need tier 1 and tier 2 as many people as we have right now. We may not need field techs sitting there remediating security controls. Let's retrain them on how to build automation platforms, right? And programming. And so, and that's inbuilt. That should be inbuilt with the vendor and the public-private partnerships, right? That has to be there from the beginning of a program. It cannot be an afterthought, just like security, typically. So it's a longer question, and I'm happy to have a much deeper dive as far as.
No, actually, absolutely. We certainly want to delve into that a little more. And Senator Rosepep is probably one of our folks from a CTE career technology education platform that we're looking to in the state for our schools as we move along. So I don't see any questions from members. Do you see any questions? Senator Rosepepper, if you'd like to chime in on that lack of skill set piece.
Well, I mean, I just say amen. There's an issue that we're working on. Obviously, we passed legislation this spring dealing with it that the governor vetoed, but we'll have another chance to get at that one. So we're just working on it. That's all I would say.
Yeah,
absolutely. So, Mr. Siddiqui, if you could stay in touch with us, we'd appreciate it.
No, happy to do that. Happy to answer any questions about that. It is an ongoing challenge with all agencies. I talk to clients all the time, and we see this often. So happy to do that. The other one was also U.S. Air Force, which is another modernization initiative. We used some of the similar types of skill sets. This one was training people on open source and cloud to be able to, for the government to be able to take over the modernization initiatives from us once we got it to a stable state. And this was creating total asset visibility for the warfighter. So it was a very mission critical system that was built during the war in Iraq and Afghanistan. And now we've modernized it to the point where it's now in an AWS GovCloud. So again, saved over $361 million since 2012 on this program as well through cost neutral modernization.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
No,
so I believe we have the Edwards performance folks coming up.
You want to go ahead and start?
Yes.
That sounds good.
So good afternoon, distinguished committee members and special guests. Thank you, Senator Hester and Delegate Jackson, for the privilege of being here to provide this discussion, help with this discussion for the Joint Committee on IT, Cybersecurity, IT, and Biotechnology. My name is Steve Edwards. And in 1997, I founded Edwards Performance Solutions to provide services, training, and solutions to government agencies, commercial enterprises, and nonprofit organizations. Over the past 23 years, the company has grown to about 100 employees with offices now in Howard and Baltimore counties. The company's core foundation is in enterprise management and specifically program project portfolio management solutions, services, and training. But over the years, our solutions have also expanded into to include IT services and a proactive cybersecurity approach, which focuses on risk and vulnerability identification, analysis, and remediation. In the areas of IT infrastructure modernization and technology migration, Edwards has overseen and managed many projects and programs for the federal government as well as commercial enterprises and nonprofit organizations. One example of the scope of projects Edwards has successfully managed is the Social Security Number Removal Initiative, or SSNRI, for the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, CMS. That program replaced the very vulnerable Social Security number reference from Medicare cards, or Medicare cards, for more than 300 million Americans, while also securing their medical records and information at the federal level, as well as within state and local healthcare exchanges. In that project, as well as many others, we were deeply involved along with the agency, enterprise, and organizational stakeholders throughout the entire project lifecycle. In our discussions with Senator Hester's office, we were given several discussion points to bring up and talk about at this committee. So let me address those now. The first discussion point was what has driven the private sector investment in modernizing IT infrastructure. So for us, as well as many other private sector companies, the primary drivers for investing are competitiveness, performance, quality of product or service, increased functionality or agility, and gaining efficiencies. In other words, being nimble enough to address dynamically changing business environments. And it goes without saying that the other driver for IT modernization is cost reductions, both in capital expenditures as well as operational expenditures. Data utilization. Data analytics is vital to providing actionable, fact-based information for decisions to be made in tight timeframes. Data analytics supports AI solutions, predictive analysis, and guidance for charting the future. In other words, making it an effective strategic planning tool. Improving operational effectiveness and efficiencies. Moving solutions and storage to the cloud is cheaper, faster, more agile, and offers a better utilization of and reallocation of human resources. And then mobility. Providing mobile and highly connected systems is a fundamental requirement for successful companies to support a diverse customer base and remote working force. Second discussion point, what kinds of benefits has the private sector seen in these efforts? The benefits seen in the private sector really mirror the drivers that I mentioned before and include competitiveness, performance, quality of service, functionality, agility, and efficiencies, as well as the capital and operational cost reductions. But benefits also include increased resource availability. It's certainly easier to find people with the knowledge and skills to support these newer systems. And there is a younger, more powerful and plentiful workforce available to provide that support. Also, an increased level of cybersecurity protections that are built into these systems, reducing the risk of cyber attack and other vulnerabilities. These risks are further reduced through the compliance with industry standards such as the NIST Cybersecurity Framework, HIPAA, ISO 20000, FISMA, and others. Organizations that embrace IT and look at it as a core function of their business tend to be the leaders in their business market sectors. So what are the standards, industry standards? There are several that should be considered and incorporated when undertaking an IT modernization project. Those standards include the NIST Cybersecurity Framework, with specific standards being the NIST 800-171 and the 853. Also PCI, the Payment Card Industry Data Security Standard, where applicable. SOX 2, ISO 9000 for quality, ISO 20000 for IT services, and ISO 27000 for IT security. FISMA, the Federal Information Security Management Act, where applicable, and HIPAA, where medical records and other personal identifiable information, or PII, it needs to be protected. And there's others that need to be looked at as you're engaging these types of projects. In next discussion point, in managing technology migration projects, what do you believe to be the best practices in terms of efficiency and managing risk? Well, over the years, there have been many different project management methodologies introduced, including waterfall, agile, Prince2, critical chain, critical path, hybrid, and others. Understanding each of these methodologies, their strengths, their weaknesses, and the project conditions under which they are best suited is paramount to managing a project of this nature. Also, these projects tend to have many components that might lend themselves to using different PM methodologies. Waterfall might be best for some components, while agile may work for others, and critical path still others. But regardless of the methodology or methodologies used in managing the project, the real key to success is plan, 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 and communicate, communicate, communicate. Spend the time needed up front planning the project, and this planning needs to include more than just the technical aspects of the project. It needs to also include comprehensive plans for change management, risk management, and communication management, just to name a few. Because this migration or enhancement project is going to change the way you do business, and it will certainly change the world that your employees, contractors, and the general public in many cases will operate. The other key element is communication. Communicate with the stakeholders of the project, communicate with the end users of the systems being affected, communicate with the general public, which is something that doesn't happen nearly enough. And most importantly, communicate with the project team implementing the change. There's a lot more that I could really say in this area, but for the sake of time, I'll move on. But suffice it to say, plan, 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 and communicate, communicate, communicate. Lastly, what is the value of modernization? What opportunities are we missing by sinking state dollars into maintenance of aging infrastructure? There will be a cost, a substantial cost, to modernizing these systems that will gain additional long-term benefits for the state. But there is also a substantial cost in continuing to maintain these legacy systems that will increase the state's technical debt, while getting further behind in the services they can provide. The benefits of modernization include improved operational performance and increased quality of service for both state employees and the general public, increased functionality to support agency missions, reduced operational and maintenance cost, increased system stability, a stronger cybersecurity stance, and increased flexibility in the resources needed to maintain the systems are all also benefits. In closing, the state really does need to invest in modernizing its IT infrastructure and moving to a mode of continuous or constant improvement. Modernization should not be a yes or no decision, and it should not be a when discussion. It needs to be a now decision and a how discussion. Every day that goes by increases risks and the cost of services. The risk of a massive agency crippling cyber attack and continuing to spend money on maintaining an infrastructure with no real return on investment gained. Also, the current systems will eventually break down to a point where they cannot be repaired or will cease to have the ability to support their intended function. Once either one of these points is reached, moving to a new solution will be exponentially more expensive to implement and will be fraught with catastrophic impacts on the state's agencies to support their mission. So yesterday, I read a very well-written op-ed about buying lipstick. At some point, these systems will reach a point where no amount of lipstick is going to dress up this situation. Thank you again for the opportunity to speak today. I truly hope that what I said will be helpful to the Joint Committee. And I'd like to take a second to introduce two members of the Edwards Senior Team who are also subject matter experts. Mr. Fletcher Hearns, our Director of Technology Solutions, and Mr. Jim Rogers, a Senior Project Manager. So between the three of us, I hope we can answer your questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Edwards. Really appreciate you and your team being here today. I thought you did a great job of emphasizing the drivers in the private sector and the rewards that are reaped, and also some of the challenges, in terms of, us getting to where we want to go in terms of modernization. I guess I haven't seen any questions from my members yet, but one of the reasons I really wanted you and NTT to be here is because you've done this in other places. And I'm feeling that, we're going to hear from our state CISO, next, but I'm feeling like we've been in this modernization process since 2015 with the Department of Labor. We just tried to do something with MVA that didn't work as well as it could have. How do we actually get unstuck and modernize more quickly so that by the time we're modernized, it's not out of date already? How do we invest so that we can start getting those rewards of efficiency and cybersecurity and cost savings? Because looking at a potential deficit of over $1 billion in the future, on our budget, we need that cost savings now. So how do we get unstuck from where we are?
I agree, and it is a huge challenge. I'm going to let Fletcher Hearns address this, and he's managed some of these projects as well as Jim Rogers.
Thank you, and it's a great question, and thank you for having Edwards. The way to get unstuck is to pick something and say, we are going to do it. And from all levels saying, we're going to do it. We may fail at parts, we're going to succeed at parts, but we're going to keep moving forward. And try not to get stuck in we have to do 100% of what the old system does in the new system on day one. Start and say, listen, we're going to pick the top 70% of what this system does. That's our first rollout. And then we'll add to it. Because if you try and bite off too much at one time, you will get stuck in the process of trying to figure it all out. So take what you can get for what dollars you have, what time you have, make that work, knowing that you'll just keep building on it. But if you don't, you'll get stuck in the mud, it's what I call you're doing 90 miles an hour on ice. The wheels are spinning really fast, but you're making no progress. So it's understanding where you need to go and taking it off in chunks that you can accomplish, and understanding there is going to be failure along the way. That's inevitable. But there's some terms in software development called fail fast, fail often, because fail fast, fail often, recover from it, and just keep moving forward. Don't be scared of the failure and say, because of the failure, I'm not going to do it. So it's paralysis by analysis. You spend too much time doing that. That doesn't mean you don't plan. It just means you plan as well as you can and understand that something's going to go wrong, and that's okay. Understand the risk, mitigate the risk where you can, accept the risk where you can, and just keep moving forward.
Okay.
Yeah, Senator, if I might.
Yes.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. I love the plan concept. I also, have seen all too often the paralysis by analysis. Look, I think, as we move forward, I mean, the key is how do we get out of our own way in order for us to step in the direction that we need to. Just got to get this thing started as we're moving forward. So from a partnership standpoint, because you have done it in other places, we look forward to continuing to work with you to help us to take those steps, those critical first steps, as we move forward to kind of lock in on prioritizing, what our needs are, and then locking in and moving forward. So I do appreciate you all's time and addressing that for us today. So we'll certainly remain in contact with you as we move forward. Delegate Bartlett, you have a question?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Co-Chair. Thank you for the presentation today. I have a quick question regarding modernization and just a step back with respect to that when it comes to cybersecurity. And I wanted to know if we have reached a level where paper is completely a thing of the past when it comes to, if a system is hacked, and do we, or if it is a thing of the past, is the only way to create the security that we must have for such sensitive information that we work with, such as DOL or other companies or other organizations, is the only way to do that to advance the technology to create the proper firewalls or whatever the latest technical term is with respect to cybersecurity.
Yeah, I mean, this is Shalon from NTT Data. I mean, I can start that conversation, but it's a great question, and it's the unsolved challenge of today's day and age, because security has to be baked into everything. The paper, the whole paper concept it goes back to inefficiencies, right? Because at the end of the day, today's day and age, you have to be able to create efficiency, effectiveness in your systems, track what you have. And data is everything, because from data you can create insights, but data also creates new threat vectors, right? And so those are the things that you have to build into your architecture. And the Edwards team talked about planning. I completely agree, but planning also includes security baked in upfront into your modernization efforts, right? And simplify the layers that you have, but bake in security from data security to incident management to
compliance of 853 controls and so on and so forth. But it is absolutely important to plan for security and integrate it in upfront.
Well, and to build on that, yes, you have to take the approach that you think about cybersecurity from day one in the planning, and also understand that the cybersecurity world is changing. You know, it used to be only external threats that we really worried about. Now we have to also set up the cybersecurity for the insider threats, because as we move away from paper and onto electronic data, you now have more places and more people that could actually touch the data. So you have to build that in from day one too, is making sure you protect yourself not only from the outside world, but from the inside world as well.
One of the things that we haven't talked about yet is state procurement. And hopefully in the future, we'll have the Department of General Services, on one of these. But I understand that one of the major barriers to state modernization is IT procurement, acquisition cycles and negotiations and making and awards. And I've had people contact me as the chair of this committee to complain about that. Any suggestions on improving state procurement?
Well, it's interesting you bring that up. This has kind of been my Maryland day, because I spent the morning in a Procurement Improvement Council meeting for the state of Maryland. So there was a lot of discussion about that this morning, and we are discussing setting up a subcommittee to address a lot of those issues. Issues like unlimited liability clauses, and just the path, the navigational path that to get through the system with a procurement. So,
well, I'm glad to hear that's moving along. If you could ensure that there's somebody from this committee on that subcommittee, so we don't duplicate efforts. There's a lot of committees on IT and cyber in the state. It's amazing we can't sort things out. I think we have a quick question from Delegate Watson, and then Chip Stewart, our state CISO, you're going to be up next. So Delegate Watson, quickly, please, and welcome.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you guys for the information. Quick question. I've dealt with several modernization programs, and once you get modernized and up to speed, you're there for that hot second, and then technology continues to advance. My question is, based on your experience with similar sized organizations, what do you think should be a reasonable amount of funding to have on a recurring basis so that we can continually stay up with modernization, stay up with new trends, be able to quickly and effectively deal with new threats on the horizon, versus we reach a point and then we wait 5 years only to find out we're behind again and now have to, come up with all the money to do it all over again? Thank you.
Jim, can you address that? Because you worked a lot with the Department of Justice and some of our other large programs.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, it's hard to say exactly, because you don't know what you're going to find when you lift the covers and see what's under there. So it's a little bit difficult to generalize. I would like to comment, though, that usually you find that we've spoken a lot about efficiencies and inefficiencies. And very often you can find that you can make these cost neutral. That there might be an investment in the first year or so to start that program. But then you can often find that you can be cost neutral.
Delegate Watson, I really appreciate the question. And I'd be happy to talk with you offline. There's something that Massachusetts did was about issuing bonds to cover the cost, because it seems like eventually we're going to save money. We've got to find that money to invest somewhere. So I really appreciate your question. I think we should keep talking about it. I'd like to turn it over to our state CISO, Chip Stewart. And for planning purposes, I've tried really hard to keep us within 2 hours. It does look like we're running a bit over time. For planning purposes, we may go until 3:45. So instead of 3:30. And if anybody has to drop off, of course, that's understandable. But I do want to make sure we hear, from our state CISO, because we've been talking about you for almost 2 hours. And so tell us what you want to do in modernization, and then we'll wrap up with MD Think, who's actually done some of this. Over to you, Chip.
Great. If someone could pull the slides up. First of all, thank you, Madam Chair, Mr. Chair, and members of the committee. For the record, my name is Chip Stewart. I'm the State Chief Information Security Officer. I'm going to try to move quickly in the interest of catching up on time, but I would like to take a moment of personal privilege to recognize some of the accomplishments of the state's teams in the coronavirus response. Next slide, please. So one of the items we did was development of a state-of-the-art contact tracing solution as part of the governor's roadmap to recovery. This innovative solution helped to fight to keep Marylanders safe from the impact of the coronavirus. We also created and maintained many crucial COVID-19 websites, including the Maryland Unites website for public outreach, provides volunteering and donation opportunities, as well as the very popular coronavirus.maryland.gov website, which is a scalable cloud solution. It has just around 10 million users since March 14th, which is pretty remarkable. And it enables real-time data sharing with the constituents so they can get up-to-the-date information about the spread of the virus. We enabled telework for thousands of state workers, including 5,000 new devices, so portable devices as opposed to the traditional workstations that many of them had, remote access for almost 10,000 new remote workers, and a massive deployment of soft phone clients enabling folks to interact with constituents as if they were at their desk. An expansion of the one-stop portal for the Department of Commerce for emergency loan relief and the grant fund. And all of that was rolled out in days instead of months. So millions in custom development costs saved. We had a handful of cybersecurity incidents, 2 major incidents, and the teams did remarkably well in taking a situation where you're normally on site and minimizing contact in order to recover quickly. So that was great work. And then also I wanted to thank the Maryland Air National Guard team for their work. They did remote evaluation and recommendation of our internet attack surface. So they looked at, I think, a little over 200 websites, and the soldiers and airmen worked tirelessly to evaluate all those sites. A lot of the work was done overnight in order to minimize the potential for impact to these critical services. Next slide. So with that said, again, thank you, Madam Chair, Mr. Chair, for allowing me the opportunity to speak today about aging infrastructure. Next slide. So one of the concepts that I think we've had a lot today is technical debt. So we're using a term, I want to make sure we're all saying the same thing. In software development, technical debt's typically the implied cost of having to do something over again because you took the easy way now to avoid the investment. In more general IT, it's the implied cost of postponing activities such as the hardware and software upgrades, infrastructure upgrades, policy and process investments. Cybersecurity risk is the potential for loss resulting from a cyber attack or data breach. So the cybersecurity risk is the interest accrued on that technical debt. Much like fiscal debt, the unaddressed debt compounds interest over time, and the cost for addressing that debt increases over time, just like interest on a credit card. So the technical debt accrues in a number of ways, neglecting normal care and feeding, so things like vulnerability management, patching, system upgrades and updates, implementing systems without fully considering security, as I think many of the previous panelists mentioned. It's much harder to add security later onto an existing system rather than building it with security in mind. Not investing in staff, which is, I think, another kind of common thread along all the presenters. Having skilled staff is critical to being able to perform these duties and functions. And then not investing in modernizing legacy systems. So from the government accounting office, I pulled some interesting stats about some old systems in the federal space. U.S. Department of Education has a legacy system that is 48 years old. U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, a system that is 52 years old. And U.S. Department of Treasury has a system that's 53 years old. So that's 1967, 2 years before we put a man on the moon. And that's a system that's currently providing services to citizens. So you think about how much has changed in that time. It's just a tremendous lift to upgrade those systems. So while much of what I present today is focused on cybersecurity risk, the information that we're going to talk about is relevant to all aspects of IT. Next slide, please. So when we talk about aging IT infrastructure, it takes a bunch of different forms, and I think they all have different challenges that are worth discussing. So one of the things that you'll hear a lot about is shared compute. So these are the mainframes and server farms that support virtualization. And while it seems like they might not be as susceptible, you have hardware vulnerabilities that impact security, as well as the ability of those systems to be patched and updated. You have IT infrastructure devices. So these are the network hardware, the routers, the switches, firewalls, wireless access points. You have end user devices, laptops and desktops, and then devices that people don't think about as much. So mobile phones and tablets, or devices that end users use as part of their daily functions. Internet of Things, which is a new buzzword, but that includes network printers, security cameras, smart TVs, and a lot of other devices. Operational technology, so HVAC, system controls, building automation, and for government, a lot of SCADA systems. And SCADA is supervisory control and data acquisition systems. So these are the platforms that control trains, like the metro and the light rail, water plants, electric grid. So a lot of critical infrastructure rides on those systems. And then the last part is applications. So modern cloud-based applications, as well as those in the traditional architecture. So next slide. So there's a lot of cybersecurity concerns regarding the aging infrastructure. There's also a lot of concerns about availability and utility, whether or not we can use the system. So kind of breaking those down into manageable chunks, vendor support and warranty. So if we need to call the vendor for support, how do we do that? Spare parts. So if we can't get parts for a system, the availability and utility of the system becomes a concern. Software updates. I break that into kind of three different parts. Security updates. So the system has a vulnerability that needs to be addressed. Bugs. The application doesn't work quite right. And features. So new features or functionality that didn't exist previously. And that can also include security features. But I consider that kind of fundamentally different than security updates. And then again, the recurring theme of skilled operators. Many of these aging systems are closed source. So the resource pool to operate and manage those systems is very limited. It also creates a circumstance where those resources are very expensive. When you have a limited supply and a huge demand, as the resource pool becomes diminished, the rates they can charge go up pretty substantially. And then with these closed systems where everything is a custom application, we have a vendor lock-in scenario where we're stuck paying the same vendor for support of a system that was built for us, but nobody else can manage. And then this certainly isn't a comprehensive list of all of the challenges we face. There's also other risks, meeting compliance requirements, reliability, and scalability. One of the things I think is important as part of this is there's a document called NIST Special Publication 864, and it describes planning for disposal as part of the system lifecycle. So when you build something, you want to start thinking about what's the useful life of the system, and when we get rid of it, what do we plan to do? How do we migrate to a new system? How do we move the data? So I think one of the key things that we can do to prevent technical debt is planning for the end at the start. Next slide. So I'm going to move through this quickly because I don't want to keep reiterating the same points that a lot of other folks made. So when we talk about shared compute, this is typically the hardware that supports virtualized servers. It can be a private cloud, public cloud, or a hybrid cloud. So one of DoIT's big wins has been in achieving economy of scale in a shared services hybrid cloud model. So by allowing the oversubscription of intermittently utilized resources, we can do more with less. Larger systems are generally more reliable and more resilient. They tend to be built that way as opposed to a server running in a small data center. So you get a savings and a faster time to deploy, and that's also very important. In terms of cloud migrations, there are three common approaches. One that I see frequently is the lift and shift. So I have a system that is comprised of a bunch of servers. I take those servers, I put them in a public cloud solution, and all I've done is moved the problem from a computer in my data center to the problem. The problem now exists in a public cloud, and it's an easy solution, but I don't think it actually addresses the issue of risk reduction and the technical debt reduction. I think often it increases it because you have new complexity added in these cloud solutions. And then there's also a need to re-architect applications to become more scalable. And in that lift and shift model, it's much more challenging to re-architect the application to be scalable. And this gets into the platform as a service and software as a service migrations. And these are longer and more complex. So moving an application from your own servers into an environment where it's made for that platform, or to a SaaS model, is software as a service model, is more challenging and more initial expense. And there's systems. So you wind up having to move pieces up one at a time, as opposed to being able to move a system up in totality. So some of the application modernization that DoIT has implemented saved the states billions in operational and support costs. So things like One-Stop, Email and Marketplace, and MD Think, which MD Think will be up next to kind of speak more to their platform. Next slide. So for IoT and operational technology, so Internet of Things, and these things tend to introduce a lot of cybersecurity risk, especially as they get older. So printers, smart boards, TVs, even lights, postage scales, door security, and security cameras. As these systems age, they frequently don't get patches, beyond a first year or two. And that introduces a pretty substantial risk to the state. And then for operational technology, the OT, the building control and automation, so elevators, things like that. And then the SCADA systems, the train control, those systems have a very similar challenge where the upgrade path is very expensive. And they have a very long service life, but the frequency of updates is it's a long cycle. Closing out the technical component, next slide. So IT infrastructure and end user compute. The infrastructure is the hardware that moves the information from the end user to the shared compute. So that's how the traffic gets from one end to the other. So we have desktops and laptops and smartphones and tablets. These devices don't have a long service life. They have a typical lifespan of around 3 years. And in an effort to save money, we tend to use them a lot longer. Infrastructure devices have a little bit longer life, typically around 5 years. And as the software moves from features to fixes and then no support at all, we start to run into a lot of risk with that. It also can be challenging, again, to the point about skilled operators. Being able to find technical expertise in these older products becomes a bit challenging. So DoIT's invested in a handful of activities around this to minimize new debt and pay off the existing debt. So we've been working with vendors to do extended support contracts, allowing us to continue to receive security and bug fixes for products that aren't commercially supported. We do a lot of hardware refresh planning. So again, planning for the end at the start, figure out what the device is going to cost over its lifetime and build that into the recurring budget so that we can replace and refresh as needed. A lot of vulnerability scanning to identify all of those IoT and OT devices that are out there. And then IT consolidation, so the shared services, specifically with regard to the network. Segmented delivery of multiple services in a secure way. So next slide. So with that said, we still have a long way to go in modernizing all of our applications. As a whole, we continue to make substantial progress in paying down the technical debt accrued over the past several decades. Thank you for your time today. With that, I'm happy to answer any questions you have.
Thank you very much. Really appreciate your remarks. I mean, I think I'm still kind of at a higher level. I appreciate, like, I know that, and I really just want to say thank you to you and your team for everything that you've done during the coronavirus pandemic. I mean, it seems like you guys have all worked really hard, as have all of our state agencies. Do we have, I guess my question, like I said, is higher level. Like, do we know, across the state, who's operating these 1998 computers and who's got a modernization plan and how much that plan is going to cost and where we're going to get the money from?
So I think I heard 4 different questions in there, so I'm going to try and answer them in order.
Okay.
So the first question, do we know who has them? And the answer is we have a great inventory of all the systems. So we know who has what.
Okay.
In terms of modernization plans, I'd have to get back to you on whether or not for each of those systems there's a plan to modernize and the cost, and then of course where the money would come from.
So there's no, I mean, I think every year, and Senator Rosenthal's on the phone, he's on budget and tax, DeWitt comes in with, a request for a budget amount. And I'm suspecting that if we were going to modernize this, I mean, there would have to be, a larger decision and a bigger ask, and we would be aware of if we had plans to kind of modernize to achieve some of the economies of scale and the efficiencies and the securities and hopefully the cost savings that would be due in the future. But we haven't seen that yet.
I would suspect that that's true, so I can get back to you on if there's a plan for that.
Okay, great.
We can reach out to the committee.
Thank you. I believe Susan Lee has a question.
Hi. Yeah, thanks, Chip. Senator Susan Lee. In order to kind of reduce this technical speak of, which I think is in the right direction, are you doing things like training and cyber hygiene and things like increasing your expertise by hiring a really qualified IT people, as well as ensuring that used by different agencies are consistent? Has there been a plan for that? And also, it goes into the previous question. Is that in a budget request or proposal going forward? Because I think you can, if you could kind of invest in things like training, inventory, consistency, that sort of thing. And are you also partnering with some of our local governments to assist them in how they can plot their strategy too?
So in terms of training, I'm going to bifurcate training into 2 different things. You have normal user training. So as part of what we do, we provide security awareness training to all users in the state. So anyone on the network gets that training. For technical training, what we're working towards is building job descriptions based on the NIST NICE framework, which allows us to use knowledge, skills, and abilities as a mechanism to find and train qualified candidates. Does that answer the question you're asking?
bringing in or hiring additional staff that have already a high level of expertise?
Yeah. So we do bring in a number of contractors and employees that are highly trained and qualified. I feel like I'm not quite answering your question. I'm sorry.
When I was speaking about training, I meant training our agency staffs as to things about cyber hygiene. That's what I meant. And then the other issue is hiring very highly qualified IT experts to help update our systems and cyber infrastructure.
So typically hiring of those high-end resources occurs through contracts, not direct hires. As I'm sure you're aware, the salary ranges for those resources are typically out of reach for the state. And also the opportunities for those folks are pretty broad. We do pretty substantial training for the do-it staff in terms of technical training. So we do vendor-related training as part of our normal cadence, and then specific cybersecurity training.
Does your cyber training for cyber hygiene, does it extend to, is it all state agencies, or is it just do it?
So the cyber hygiene training goes out monthly to all agencies. So it reaches probably close to, I think it's about 60,000 employees.
Are there other questions for Mr. Stewart? Delegate Jackson, do you see any?
I do not. Chip, thank you again. When the senator and I were appointed co-chairs of this committee, DO-IT was one of the first agencies we reached out to. So you all are a valuable partner for us as we move through this process. So we appreciate your presentation.
Well, thank you all very much. I appreciate the time.
Thank you very much. So last but not least, I'd like to welcome MD Think to the table. Apologies once again for having about 10 minutes left. And I'd like to make sure at the end of this that everybody has your presentation and we can do another MD Think specific introduction to any members who want more details than what we have time for right now. But with that said, I'd just like for you to give us a glimpse into what MD Think is and what it's accomplished and how that might be something that the state could leverage going forward.
Great, thank you. Senator Hester and Delegate Jackson and the members of the committee, thank you for allowing us the opportunity to be here. We do have a presentation, if we could throw up those slides. It's about a 10-minute presentation that we're going to try and move through in about 5 minutes if we can here.
Thank you.
So if we can jump down to slide 3, what is MD Think? So MD Think is really an innovative program that is delivering a first of its kind in the country new state-of-the-art applications for the Department of Human Services, replacing 1970s, 1980s, and 1990s technology, which supports most of our major programs, with state-of-the-art applications, but more importantly, moving those new applications over onto a new cloud-based platform that uses shared services so that we reduce the redundancy in our applications, and those applications are now better integrated and able to share services and improve performance for the people of Maryland. So next slide, please. So very quickly, this is where we were. Lots and lots of standalone applications where our workers would have to log into every one separately. They're on the left side of the slide. So all of these standalone applications supporting these different programs, each of them having a lot of duplicative functions, the workers having to log into different things separately and re-enter the same information, and the same thing for our clients out there. So the future of what we're moving for is a single platform with individual applications for the different programs, because the programs are different and have different needs, but then utilizing shared services so that we build, say, a content management system once instead of building it 5 times or 7 times or 27 times. And high modularity, so we can replace pieces as they get old and as new technology becomes available. We can unplug and plug in new solutions that are more effective without having to rebuild every application separately. So it allows us to keep up with that technology deficit and provides us with a lot of benefits of being able to integrate the data, integrate our service delivery, and improve our engagement with our clients. So next slide, please. So this is the way we like to think about it. What is a shared platform really like? If you think about an airport, Southwest and Delta and American, they don't all have separate airports in Maryland. They all fly into the same airport, BWI, and that's because there's an efficiency and economy of scale to having a single infrastructure. So if you think about a modern airport, there's lots of infrastructure that's shared. You have one air traffic control. You have one set of security that everybody passes through. You have baggage handling and parking and car rental facilities and one set of runways that all the planes take off of. But within that airport, you also have separate terminals, that Southwest has a terminal and Delta has a terminal. And those terminals, they control the experience. They decide how many flights go out and where those flights are going. They decide how you're going to board the aircraft, and whether they're seats or benches, whatever they have there, they're controlling that part of terminal. It's the same thing with MD Think. We have a lot of things like master data management, a shared data repository, business rules, a lot of common services that reoccur across multiple applications. So rather than building those multiple times, we have those shared services. But then within the applications, the various programs get to control how the experience works, how that interacts with both the clients and with our end users in the department. So that's the analogy we like to use to describe what MD Think is, with this new shared platform is. Next slide, please. So why are we doing this? It's not just about replacing old technology with new technology. There's lots of old technology that works great, you know, that still is fine. It's cost efficient. So let's go ahead and leave it in place. What this is really about was the realization that we weren't doing a good job for our customers, and we were being held back by our technology in how we were serving our clients. And we also weren't delivering value for the taxpayers. They were funding really expensive, really fragile, really vulnerable systems that weren't delivering good outcomes for the clients. And so replacing this is going to allow us to provide better service more efficiently, more effectively, at a lower cost, while starting to realize some economies of scale. Next slide, please. So this is just a quick overview of our operational structures. One of the things that's different in how MD Think approaches the world is we don't use a systems integrator. So there's no IBM or Conduent or Accenture who's building this system for us. We put together a team of talented state employees who are leading this initiative, and then using our agile contract vehicle, we go out and we hire individually, handpick the various programmers and software engineers and other experts who are building this system on our behalf. So basically, we're our own general contractor for building this. We don't rely on somebody else to select which craftsman, which plumber is going to put things together, which engineer or electrician is going to do the wiring. We're picking the best and brightest that we can find out there to do this work for us. And that also means that we can shift folks on and off this project. We can pivot very quickly because we're not constantly renegotiating our contracts with our vendors to say, oh, we want to add this feature. Well, that wasn't part of your initial ask. That'll be an extra $1 million. We don't have those challenges. It comes down to basically, this is the time it's going to cost us to do this, and this is what we have to pay for the labor. So this gives you a sense of the the size of the project, at various points, we've had more than 400 people working on this project collectively between state employees and contractors. So if we can move to the next slide, please. So there's been a lot of discussion about waterfall and agile approaches. The best way to look at it is with waterfall, you put together your entire spec. You basically hand somebody the blueprints and say, that's great, I'll come back and look at the house when it's completely finished. And whether I like it or if it's wrong, well, then you have to tear it apart and rebuild it again. With Agile, we work in these little small blocks, and we're constantly providing demos for our end users so that they can look at the system and say, yes, that's exactly what I wanted, or no, that's completely different than what I thought I was going to be getting here. So that's the way that we have approached this, was an Agile methodology. As I mentioned, we're our own contractor, so we're controlling what work gets performed in each step of this process. We also took a concept that we called reasonably viable product. It isn't really practical for our workers to be working in the old legacy system and in the new system simultaneously. So in order for us to get out of our old legacy system, we had to build a system that was going to do 100% of what they're able to do today in that old legacy system. Not necessarily do it the same way, do it more efficiently and more effectively, but they have to be able to do those things. That's our reasonable viable product. So that's what we deliver out in our first launch when we're rolling out these systems. But we also do that with the knowledge that after deployment, we are going to continue development of this system. So there will be initial rounds of development to add additional functionalities. For instance, we rolled out our child welfare system, and we'll talk about that in a moment, to our workers. It's been really successful. We know one of the things we plan to deploy in the future is a mobile app for those workers, so that if the system is offline, if they can't get access to the internet, they can still do work with families out in the field using a tablet or a smartphone, which we've deployed to all of them, and not have to connect to the internet. That's one of those future developments that's in the plan that we're working towards and anticipate having in the next year or so. So next slide, please. This is just a quick roadmap. This project, we received our federal funding approval in January 2017. So we stood up our team, put together our roadmap, started the procurements that we needed, including that Agile procurement, which is, we have roughly 15 companies in the state of Maryland that are providing us those engineers and software architects and whatnot to help build this system. So in 2017, we focused really on building this cloud platform. And our focus on building the platform was because initially we had 90-10 funding from the federal government to build that. So we built that part that got the most 90-10 funding. We built that first and rolled that out at the end of 2017. 2018, we deployed the long-term care application, which was the start of our eligibility and enrollment application. First of its kind in the country to be deployed. And that's used not just by our workers, but by nursing homes and families around the state. We also awarded and started development of our CJAMS, which is a replacement not just for our child welfare system, but also the Department of Juvenile Services and their ASSIST system, and the adult services and licensing and monitoring. So I'm looking and I'm saying we're about out of time, and I'm going to try and accelerate even faster through this. I'm not going to go through all these progress. Suffice it to say, we did deploy the child welfare system in a pilot last year. And then at the start of this year, we deployed it. And if we can move to the next slide. Okay, so this is part of what I wanted to focus on. We were getting ready to go. We had deployed the child welfare system in 2 counties. It was working great, and we were about ready to deploy in 10 additional counties when we got the orders to move to teleworking and to move everybody out of our offices. So literally, we were supposed to go the week that we moved everybody out of the offices. So we paused, and then we came back to it in April, and we deployed in 4 counties remotely, virtually. So without our workers being in the offices, we were able to give them the training and deploy this child welfare application to 4 additional counties. We deployed to 6 additional counties in May. And then in June, we deployed in Baltimore City, which is our largest jurisdiction by caseload. And we will deploy to the remainder of the state at the end of July. All of this while we were in a telework posture. This is what being on the cloud and being in a modern application environment and having a modern approach to development has allowed us to do. We also did that while migrating several of our old legacy cottage applications, we call them. These are a bunch of basically the workaround solutions or small program applications that were hosted on the old legacy system. They're now over on the MDThink platform. We did that while we were on telework. We also supported the Health Benefits Exchange during their mini open enrollment for COVID-19 response, and supported the PEBT program in issuing benefits to more than 500,000 children in the state of Maryland, and deploying thousands of laptops to our public benefits workers who were primarily using desktop machines. Next slide. This is a quick overview of what we go through to bring other departments onto the platform. Right now, we are bringing Department of Health, has several applications that they're moving over onto the MDThink platform, and Department of Education is also bringing one of their applications onto the platform. That is really part of the promise that we had. The more applications that we move onto this platform, the more savings we're going to realize, because there is an economy of scale as you spread out those shared services across multiple applications. I'd also like to mention, it's in the achievement slide, in 2019, we also migrated the Health Benefits Exchange onto the MDThink platform. 2019 was the first year they had an open enrollment while being on the MDThink platform. And I'm happy to say that they experienced absolutely 0 problems with that, which was a real success for this. A high risk, high priority application being able to run on this platform with 0 problems. So if we can migrate to the next slide. Okay, and at this point, I'm going to turn it over to our Chief Technology Officer, who really has been running all of this. I speak about it well, but Subi is the man who gets all the work done. So if at this point, if I can turn it over to our Chief Technology Officer, Subi Muniasamy.
Thank you, Greg, and thank you, everyone. The cybersecurity, this topic has been widely covered by our NASIO folks as well as the Edwards and DoIT. I'm just going to keep it very simple. Overall, when it comes to cybersecurity or any security, we have totally embedded into our application development activity itself. There is nothing special we are doing. It's completely embedded into the complete development of the platform as well as the application. Next slide, please. Yes, we have strictly followed all the 3 core principles of cybersecurity to make sure the confidentiality is properly maintained, the integrity, only the authorized users are allowed to make the changes, and the availability wise, it is available to the right people at the right time with the right data governance. Next slide, please. Yes, when it comes to the cybersecurity strategy, there's a big data governance we put in place, and there is a team of people work towards it to make sure all the authority to connect, authority to operate, all those things are properly taken care while we are building the platform. We have implemented the high watermark among the industry standards such as the NIST, ISMA, IRS, and MARSI standards to meet the platform security requirements. These standards allow us to store the FDI, Affordable Care Act data, and other Medicaid data into the platform with a lot of confidentiality. We have gone through multiple security assessments from external federal agencies such as CMS and IRS. We have completely vetted through them before putting any data into the platform. Right now, all the data is there and it is operational. Next slide, please. Yes, this slide, just to give a kind of like a visibility of what is the difference in depth of how the data is stored and covered by multi-layered architecture. Due to some reason, in any one of the layer has been exposed or breached, the other layer will stand up and do the right level of protection to protect the key data what has been stored into the platform. At this point, you can just see like a lot of multi-layer approach we followed to implement this strategy. Next slide, please. Yes, this is the role-based access control. While we are doing this complete cybersecurity activity, as someone before mentioned, not only external threat, there is a lot of threat internally also. So we do have certain policies and procedures in place to make sure all the people are properly trained. They are all went through the background checks, clearance, and also internally we do have a good controls and the centralized security is in place to provide the right access to the right people to make sure they are not meddling with some of the unnecessary data element. Here, this just to give the depiction of like how our RBAC control has been implemented into this. That's all we have for today, and we are open to take any questions at this point.
Thank you very much. I appreciate you guys sitting through the first 2.5 hours of this hearing and then shortening your presentation for all of us. I was actually just going back and forth in the chat box with my co-chair delegate, Jackson, about how interesting this is and how it really is, you know, probably one of the best cases of modernization in the state of Maryland. And I do have some questions, but I'd like to set up a time, you know, offline to chat with you and any other members who want to join us. You know, I'm really interested in hearing more about how the other agencies are joining on and the economies of scale that we see there and the cost savings. I'm also interested, I thought I heard that you were in charge of your own procurement. And I thought that that was something, no, Steve's saying no, okay. No.
We're not in charge of our own.
No, he said contractor. He's sort of his own general contractor.
Got it. Okay. And then just your vision for the overall program and how we think, you know, other agencies can piggyback on it. So my staff will be in charge of your office for follow-up conversation. If any of the other members want to hop on that call, we'd welcome you. It really seems awesome. Are you seeing any other questions at this point, Delegate Jackson?
I am not, and I'd like to echo your sentiment. I look forward to speaking with you all offline. You know, we need all the help we can get as we move toward addressing this concern. So thank you very much.
Yeah. So then in terms of closing remarks, I just want to thank, you know, all of our members and all of our speakers. I know your time is very valuable, and we had great attendance today. Thank you for being here. If you do have follow-up questions that you want our team to reach out to our speakers on, please let us know. I guess my takeaway from today is that we really are currently paying to preserve a flawed system. And if there are ways that we can save money by investing now for a more efficient future, you know, now during COVID-19 is a time to really try to drive that forward for the sake of all of us. And I'm excited that we have so many great partners in the state and the private sector to help us with that process. So with that, I'll turn it over to Delegate Jackson and then say goodbye.
Again, I echo your sentiment, and you know, partnerships are the greatest thing going. We just need to make sure that we exercise them. Also, I chatted with the staff as we were going through today's session. For all members, these PowerPoints will be made available to everyone, and we look forward to our next meeting. Check your emails for our next session. I don't know the date, Senator.
It'll probably be after the summer holiday, sometime in September.
Yeah, cool. And stay as cool as you can, and stay safe, everyone.
Stay safe, wear a mask when you're not on Zoom.
Oh my God, yes. All right.
Thank you, everybody. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.